There is a specific kind of pain that only a mother can feel, the pain of being erased by the child she carried, fed, and sacrificed everything for. Mabel Okonkwo experienced this pain twice. The first time was at her son's graduation when David looked her in the eyes and said he didn't know her. The second time was worse. At a glittering awards ceremony in Lagos, David stood on stage accepting Employee of the Year, speaking about his humble beginnings, while his mother sat in borrowed clothes at the back of the room. When she approached him afterward with tears streaming down her face, he turned to security and had her removed like a stranger. What kind of shame makes a man deny the woman who gave him life? This is the story of sacrifice, betrayal, and whether love can survive when pride enters the heart. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story begins in a small village outside Enugu, where red dust settles on zinc roofs and mornings are marked by roosters and women's prayers at the stream. Here lived a woman named Mabel, and everyone who knew her would say she had a heart stronger than iron and hands that never stopped working. But Mabel wasn't always this way. There was a time when she was young and full of dreams, newly married to a carpenter named Emeka, who built furniture people traveled to buy. They were happy with their small house, and baby boy David, who had his father's eyes and his mother's smile. For 4 years, life was good. But happiness is fragile. The day Emeka died in a construction accident, Mabel was at the market buying yams. By the time she arrived at the site, he was gone. They said it was quick, but quick or slow. He was still dead, and she was a 23-year-old widow with a 3-year-old son and no idea how to survive. For 3 days after the burial, Mabel didn't speak. She sat with David on her lap, staring at walls, trying to comprehend how the world could continue when her universe had collapsed. On the 4th day, something inside her hardened. She looked at David sleeping peacefully and made a decision. She would not let her son grow up in poverty. She would work until her body gave out to give him opportunities she never had. And so she did. Mabel's first job was washing clothes for wealthier families. Every morning at 4 o'clock before sunrise, she would wake, tie her wrapper, and walk to the stream with her basin balanced on her head. She would scrub until her knuckles bled while other women chatted around her. Some looked at her with pity, others with contempt, but Mabel kept her head down and hands moving because pride doesn't feed a child. By the time David turned 5 and started school, Mabel had taken on a second job, cleaning classrooms and toilets at the primary school in exchange for David's fees. Sometimes while scrubbing floors on her knees, she would hear David's voice from a classroom reading aloud, and her heart would swell with such pride that she forgot the ache in her back. But 2 jobs weren't enough, so she took a third. Every evening at 6 o'clock, when other mothers were settling in with their families, Mabel would walk to Mrs. Nwosu's canteen near the motor park. She would cook and serve food until midnight, standing over steaming pots with no ventilation, washing dishes outside while mosquitoes feasted on her arms. She would return home after midnight, her body screaming for rest, lie beside David, and whisper prayers into his hair. Lord, let him rise where I have fallen. Let these hands give him a future I never had. Then she would sleep 3 hours before the cycle began again. This was Mabel's life. 3 brutal, unending jobs that carved lines into her face and turned her hands rough as bark, but never touched the fierce love in her chest. David grew up watching his mother disappear into work. He understood their life was different, saw how other children had fathers who came home, mothers without shadows under their eyes. But he also knew his mother loved him with a ferocity that could move mountains. When he was 8, he wrote her a Mother's Day letter. Mama, when I grow big, I will buy you a house with a roof that does not leak. I will make you rest. I promise. Mabel kept that letter in a tin box under her bed, and on her hardest days, she would read it and somehow find strength to continue. As years passed, David's intelligence became undeniable. His teachers would tell Mabel, "This boy has a gift. He could go far with proper education." And Mabel would nod, heart swelling with pride and terror, because proper education required impossible money. When David finished primary school at the top of his class, the question became, how would they afford secondary school? Mabel borrowed from cooperatives, braided hair on Sundays, sold the small piece of land her husband had left her, the only thing of value she owned. She paid David's fees every single term for 6 years. Through secondary school, as her body slowly broke down, David thrived. He was bright, ambitious, respectful, hungry for knowledge. When he was 17, he came home with life-changing news. He had been accepted to the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He would be the first in their family's history to attend university. Mabel collapsed from emotion that day, and David caught her, both crying and laughing at what this meant. That night the village celebrated, but behind Mabel's smile was new terror. How would she pay for 4 years of university? The answer was, barely. Mabel worked harder than ever, which seemed impossible, but desperation pushes the body beyond limits. She took washing from neighboring villages, sold snacks at the motor park, borrowed from multiple sources with accumulating interest like stones on her back. There were nights she ate nothing so David could have transport money. Her health failed. She developed a rattling cough, constant joint pain. Village women whispered, "Mabel is killing herself for that boy." They were right. She was dying slowly, one sacrifice at a time, but every time she sent money or received a letter about past exams, she felt it was worth it. In his first year, David's letters were warm and frequent. He wrote about classes, the massive campus, the library with countless books. "Mama, everything you're doing, I will repay 1,000 times over." Mabel would read these letters until the paper softened and ink faded, but gradually the letters became less frequent, one a month, then every 2 months. David's explanations were always the same. "City life is busy, Mama," and Mabel understood, or told herself she did. But late at night, she wondered why his voice on rare phone calls sounded different, more distant, like he was speaking to a stranger. What Mabel didn't know was that David had begun to feel ashamed. At university, surrounded by students from wealthy families, children of doctors, lawyers, politicians, David felt like an imposter. When people asked about his family, he became vague. "My parents are in the East," never elaborating. When friends invited him home, he invented excuses rather than admit he couldn't afford transport or that his home had no electricity or running water. Slowly, methodically, David constructed a new identity. He adopted new mannerisms, erased his village accent, joined social clubs with children of the wealthy. He was building a network and a version of himself that had no room for a mother with calloused hands. He convinced himself this was necessary, that to succeed, he had to leave his past behind. He told himself he would go back and care for his mother properly once he was truly successful. But he was lying to himself. Would you have done the same? Would you have hidden your roots to fit into a world that valued wealth over character? By his final year, David had perfected his lies. When he graduated with honors, Mabel borrowed money and traveled to Nsukka wearing her best wrapper. She found David with friends, all in graduation gowns, taking photographs. "David," she called out, voice cracking with emotion. "My son." He turned. Their eyes met, and Mabel saw fear, panic, shame. One of David's friends, a girl in expensive sunglasses, whispered, "Who is that?" David's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother and made a choice. "I don't know her," he said quietly, then louder, "She must have confused me with someone else." He turned and walked away. Mabel stood frozen, unable to process what happened. People stared, some with pity, some amusement. A security guard approached, asking if she needed help. She shook her head and walked out past celebrating families, past the joyful music that now felt like mockery. The journey home was the longest of Mabel's life. She sat by the bus window, crying silently. When neighbors asked how graduation went, she forced a smile. "It was beautiful. David looked so handsome. She couldn't speak the truth yet, but in the weeks that followed, something inside Mabel died. She continued her 3 jobs mechanically, without the fire that had sustained her for 20 years. The village women noticed, "Something has broken in Mabel." And they were right. Meanwhile, David moved to Lagos and secured a bank job through university connections. He rented an apartment, bought his first suit and expensive shoes. He was living his dream: corporate meetings, after-work drinks, weekends at the beach discussing stock markets. By all measures, he was successful. But success built on denial is a house with no foundation. In Lagos, David thrived. Within 2 years, he was promoted twice. He bought a car, moved to a better apartment in Lekki, dated Kioma, whose father owned a logistics company. When she asked about his family, he gave rehearsed answers. "My parents are in the East. We're not close." Kioma accepted this because David had become such a convincing liar. He sent money home occasionally, small deposits into an account he'd opened for Mabel, but never called, never visited. He justified everything in his mind, telling himself he was building a career, that he would properly care for his mother once he became truly successful. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was ashamed. 4 years after denying his mother at graduation, David's bank announced he had been selected as Employee of the Year. The ceremony would be at a luxury hotel in Victoria Island with executives, clients, and media coverage. The bank sent formal invitations to recipients' families. Somehow, one reached Mabel. When she opened that cream envelope and read, "Employee of the Year, Mr. David Okonkwo," her dead heart flickered back to life. Her neighbor, Mrs. Adese, who knew about the graduation incident, was skeptical. "Why would you go after what he did?" Mabel's voice was firm. "Because he is my son. Maybe he has changed. Maybe this is our chance to be family again." What can you say to a mother's hope? Mabel prepared like it was the most important day of her life. She borrowed money for transport, borrowed a navy blue wrapper with gold trim, had her hair braided, even bought perfume, something she'd never done for herself. She woke at 3 o'clock to catch the first bus. The 8-hour journey saw the bus break down twice. When Mabel arrived at the Victoria Island Hotel, exhausted and dusty, she looked up at the gleaming glass building and felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, white cloth tables with elaborate flowers, waiters carrying champagne and delicate food Mabel didn't recognize. She felt completely out of place, but found a seat at the back, hands folded, eyes scanning for David. She spotted him near the front with colleagues and a beautiful woman. He looked so different. Perfectly tailored suit, precise haircut, the confident face of someone who had made something of himself. Mabel's eyes filled with tears. Her son. All the pain suddenly felt worth it. When they called David's name, the room erupted in applause. He walked onto the stage with easy confidence, stood behind the podium in spotlights, and began speaking about his journey: hard work, determination, overcoming obstacles, his humble beginnings. But he didn't mention his mother, not once. Not the woman who washed clothes until her hands bled, who ate nothing so he could have transport money, who sold her only land for his fees. He spoke as though he had achieved everything alone through individual brilliance. Mabel listened to every word, heart breaking with each omission. When David finished to thunderous applause and walked off stage, Mabel stood. Her legs felt weak, but she forced them to move. She walked toward him, weaving between tables. "David!" she called out, voice trembling but audible. "David, my son!" He turned. Again their eyes met. Again Mabel saw panic. But this time David had more to lose. Colleagues, girlfriend, bosses, clients all watching. Mabel reached him, grabbed his hand, tears streaming. "David, it's me. It's Mama. I came because of your invitation. I'm so proud of you." For one brief moment, David's face softened. His throat worked. His hand twitched, almost squeezing back. But then Kioma stepped forward, confused. "David, Who is this woman? The moment collapsed. David pulled his hand away. He looked at his mother, the woman who had destroyed her body so he could have a future, and made the same cowardly choice. I'm sorry, I think you're mistaken. I don't know you. Then louder to security. Excuse me, can you help this woman? She seems confused. Could you imagine standing in Mabel's position? The security guard, looking uncomfortable, gently led Mabel out past staring guests, past crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations, past the life her son built by erasing her. Outside in the hot Lagos night, Mabel collapsed on a bench and wept with such deep sobs that a hotel staff member sat beside her and held her, saying nothing because there were no words. That night, as Mabel waited at the motor park for a bus home, a hotel cleaner approached her. Madam, I saw what happened inside. I'm sorry. The cleaner sat down. Earlier today, when we were setting up, that young man gave me money. He said if a village woman claiming to be his mother tried to enter, I should turn her away. He called you a beggar trying to embarrass him. Mabel felt like she might vomit. He had planned it. The denial wasn't panic. It was premeditated. The cleaner squeezed Mabel's hand. But I want you to know, Ma, pride like his always comes before a fall. Mabel returned to the village completely broken. The light that sustained her through decades was permanently extinguished. She stopped working, stopped eating properly, sat for hours staring at nothing. Mrs. Adais visited daily, and one evening Mabel finally spoke. I destroyed myself to build him up, and he destroyed me to hide where he came from. I thought if I sacrificed enough, he would honor me. But I should have taught him that poverty is not shameful, that I was not shameful, that where we came from was something to honor, not hide. There were no good answers, only the terrible truth that sometimes those we pour our lives into become the very people who deny us. In Lagos, David continued his life as though nothing happened. But guilt is strange. It starts as a whisper you can ignore, but it grows until it becomes a scream. David couldn't look at mothers without thinking of his own. He couldn't enjoy success without hearing a voice asking, "At what cost?" He drank more. His relationship with Kioma strained. His work performance slipped. Nothing was fine because his foundation was cracking, built on lies and denial, and no structure stands when its foundation is rotten. 6 months after the award ceremony, everything crashed down. David's bank came under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. The scandal exploded across national news. David, a rising star, was implicated, not as mastermind, but as complicit, having signed documents without questions, looked away when things didn't add up. When police came at 6 a.m, they searched his apartment, seized his laptop, handcuffed him, and led him down to the street where neighbors watched. His face appeared in newspapers and online. The same media that celebrated him now crucified him. Kioma broke up via text. Friends stopped answering calls. In Lagos, when you fall alone. David was denied bail and sent to Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison, where Nigeria sends its criminals, where the privileged discover what it means to be stripped of everything. David's cell was 12 by 8 feet, shared with 9 other men. The toilet was a bucket in the corner. Food was watery rice with weevils. At night, lying on concrete, not enough mats for everyone, David thought honestly about his life for the first time in years, about how far he'd climbed and how fast he'd fallen. And in that darkness, he thought about his mother. He remembered her rough hands, how she'd save meat from her plate for him, the letter he'd written at 8. Mama, when I grow big, I will buy you a house with a roof that does not leak. And he wept for his cowardice, for the mother he'd denied twice before the world. 3 months into incarceration, a guard came. Okonkwo, you have a visitor. David assumed his lawyer. He shuffled to the visiting room in chains and faded prison uniform. And there sat Mabel. She had aged terribly, completely gray hair, thinner than ever, tired eyes that once burned with determination. but she was there. David stopped walking, unable to move, unable to comprehend why she'd come. The guard pushed him forward. "Sit down." David sat, couldn't look at her. Mabel spoke first, voice quiet and hoarse. "I heard what happened. I came." David's head dropped, shoulders shaking. "Mama, I'm sorry. I don't deserve—" "You're my son," Mabel interrupted, voice firmer. "You will always be my son." She reached across the table and took his smooth, city-soft hands in her rough, calloused ones and held them tight. David broke down completely, crying like he hadn't since childhood, great heaving sobs echoing through the visiting room. Because despite everything, his denial, shame, betrayal, his mother was here. "I was ashamed," David finally managed through tears, "ashamed of where we came from. I thought if people knew about the poverty, they wouldn't respect me. I thought I had to forget you to become someone important." Mabel was quiet for a long moment. "My son, I worked 3 jobs, went hungry so you could eat, sold our land for your fees. Do you know why? Not so you could become rich or wear expensive clothes. I did it so you would have choices I never had, so you would have dignity and knowledge. But knowledge without character is useless. Success without integrity is worthless. And a man who is ashamed of his mother is no man at all." She squeezed his hands tighter. "The poverty you were ashamed of was never shameful. What's shameful is having money without compassion, climbing a ladder then kicking it down so no one else can follow, forgetting that every great man was once a child who needed his mother. But I forgive you, because even when a tree forgets its roots, the earth still holds it up, and I am your earth, your foundation. I will not abandon you, even when you abandoned me. Would you have forgiven him? Could you have shown up for someone who denied you so publicly, so cruelly?" David spent 14 months in prison before his case was heard. The evidence was circumstantial. He hadn't masterminded the fraud, but had been a willing participant in corruption. The judge sentenced him to time served and community service. When David walked out of Kirikiri, nobody waited except Mabel. She had taken a bus from the village and stood outside the gate since early morning. David saw her and fell to his knees on the dirty Lagos street. He wrapped his arms around her legs and cried, "Mama, forgive me. Please forgive me." "Stand up, my son," Mabel said gently, pulling him to his feet. "Stand up. You have fallen, but you are not broken. Now we go home and rebuild, not your career or reputation, but your character." They returned to the village together, the place David had desperately tried to escape. And something strange happened. The village welcomed him back, not because he was successful, he had nothing now, but because he was humbled. The elders said, "A man who returns after falling has learned more than one who never left." David moved back into his mother's small house with the leaking zinc roof he'd been ashamed of, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. It wasn't shameful. It was built on love. Every zinc sheet bought with his mother's labor, every nail purchased with her sacrifice. This house was a temple, and he'd been too blind to see it. David began working in the village, helping local farmers improve businesses using his university knowledge, teaching financial literacy at the community center, helping youth apply for scholarships. He became finally the man his mother always hoped he would be, not rich or famous, but useful, good, honorable. 2 years after his prison release, Mabel fell ill. The decades of brutal labor had finally caught up. Her body, which had endured so much, began shutting down. David cared for her the way she had once cared for him, with patience, tenderness, and devotion. He would cook her meals, help her to the bathroom, sit beside her bed reading or simply holding her hand. One evening, as the sun set through the window of their small house, Mabel looked at David and smiled weakly. "My son, do you remember what you wrote me when you were 8 years old?" David's eyes filled with tears. "I said I would buy you a house with a roof that doesn't leak." "You did better than that," Mabel whispered. "You came home. You remembered who you are." That is worth more than any house." She touched his face gently. "I forgive you completely, David. Not because what you did was right, but because love is stronger than shame. Remember that when I'm gone." 3 days later, Mabel passed away peacefully in her sleep. David held her hand as she took her last breath, and he whispered, "Mama, you gave me life, and I almost threw it away. But you showed me that real strength isn't in denying where you came from, it's in honoring it." The funeral was attended by the entire village. People spoke of Mabel's fierce love, her incredible sacrifice, her lion's heart. And they spoke of David too, not with judgment, but with hope, because his story wasn't over. In the years that followed, David dedicated his life to honoring his mother's memory. He started a scholarship fund for village children who couldn't afford school fees, funded by the money he earned from consulting work. He told Mabel's story everywhere he went, never hiding his shame, using it instead as a lesson. "My mother worked 3 jobs to send me to school," he would say, "and I repaid her by pretending I didn't know her. I thought success meant forgetting where I came from. But true success is remembering, honoring, and lifting others the way someone once lifted you." The story of Mabel and David became a village legend, told to children for generations. A story about the cost of shame and the power of a mother's love. A story that asked, "Can love survive when pride enters the heart?" And answered, "Yes, but only when pride is finally humbled." Do you think he made the right choice in the end? Would you have been able to forgive yourself? If your mother is still alive, call her tonight. If your father is still living, thank him for every sacrifice. And if you've ever been helped by someone humble, don't let pride make you blind. Tell me in the comments, would you forgive a child who denied you? Have you ever been forgotten by someone you helped raise? This has been the story of Mabel and David. And remember, sometimes the richest people are those who never forget where they came from. I'm your storyteller, and I'll meet you again in the next story. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories that will remind you that life is full of unexpected miracles, if we're just brave enough to recognize them when they appear.